Cornelius Vanderbilt. Railroad consolidation, so he would go around and buy up different railroads here, and then he would own a whole bunch of them. Another example of horizontal integration. About what makes somebody a philanthropist, and we talked about Bill Gates. Obviously, Vanderbilt University, blah, 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 blah. There's tons of examples of different things that he gave money to, that he supported, that he founded. But I'm going to show you a clip. And again, circle whether you think he is a robber baron or a captain of industry. And then on the side, write why you think this.
The message is clear. The competition no longer sees Vanderbilt as a man to fear.
People are always rooting for very successful people to fail. The day people are not taking shots at you means you're not on top anymore.
But where they see weakness, the Commodore sees an opportunity to assert his dominance and teach William what it means to be a Vanderbilt.
If they want a war, I'll give them a war.
Vanderbilt owns the only rail bridge into New York City. It's the gateway to the country's largest port, supplying the entire continent. Vanderbilt knows this is the hammer he needs to beat his rivals into submission.
Sit down. I want you to close the Albany Bridge.
Without the bridge, every other railroad is shut out of New York City.
Vanderbilt, in essence, single-handedly erected a blockade around the nation's largest city, cutting it off from contact with the rest of the country. He was now asserting his dominance.
Ladies and gentlemen, this train will not be going any farther.
We're going to watch them bleed.
JPMorgan worked for his father's bank and eventually developed a reputation as a businessman, a cutthroat businessman, I might add. Eventually made history by merging with Andrew Carnegie and forming the first billion-dollar corporation. Also, eventually he formed what is now JPMorgan Chase or Chase Bank. Again, I'm going to show you a clip of this. Circle robber baron or captain of industry and explain why.
We build relationships. We grow businesses. We support communities. We advise countries. We take care of our own. Every day, we show the world who we really are. We are tellers, traders, branch managers, CEOs, mothers, fathers, sisters, brothers, loyal friends, trusted partners. We are JPMorgan Chase.
When asked to name his price, Andrew Carnegie jotted down a figure on the back of an envelope. Morgan looked at the price, $493 million, and immediately said, "I accept." With Carnegie Steel under his belt, Morgan formed the United States Steel Corporation in March of 1901. Its stock was valued at $1,400 million. Morgan had created the world's first billion-dollar corporation. But his enormous power now brought public scrutiny.
After his creation of U.S. Steel, he controlled somewhere between 60% and 70% of the American steel industry. He controlled a third of American railways at a time when railway stocks comprised 60% of all the stocks on the New York Stock Exchange.
Okay, so take a quick second and flip back through your notes and review all that we've covered. It's a lot. This is why I like decision-making activities, because they're so good at having you sit in the midst of all of these different pieces and parts and moving things. So we have captains of industry, we have robber barons making all of these decisions impacting the working class in so many different ways. So what did this lead to? Had multiple effects on the workplace. It led to a large, concentrated workforce. Think about the massive amounts of people who are working in these factories, these steel factories under Carnegie, the oil refineries under Rockefeller, the banks of JPMorgan. Now, people like Rockefeller, people in charge who have to pay their workers, want to make money. What's the best way to make money if you're manufacturing something or you're making something? It's to cut what you're paying your workforce because it's one of your largest costs, the workforce. So what do? You pay them low wages. You make them work long hours. You don't pay for extra safe conditions. So work conditions get dangerous or were dangerous and they continue to get more dangerous. We did one of the decision-making activities from the perspective of business owners. So you should know this. You should remember this. This was a little bit ago, but you should remember the outcomes and why they chose to allow these things to happen. They're trying to cut costs so when they sell their product, they're not having to pay for the workers, because if you can cut down the cost of the workers, you can sell your product and make more money. So the more money you make is usually a result of how little or how low your costs are. So they want to keep their costs down. So they allow low wages, long hours, and dangerous working conditions. So we did then, after we did the decision-making activity from the perspective of the business owners, we did the And what did the unions fight for? They wanted, in general, better pay, better hours, and better, more safe working conditions. And you can see all of that right here. You know, you have the Carnegies, the Rockefellers paying low wages, long hours, and dangerous working conditions were common. Thus, a result, the workers get together and they say, hey, we want better wages, we want better hours, we want safer working conditions. So in general, that's what unions fight for. So unions are just organizations of workers who are fighting for better working conditions, better hours, and better wages. So real quick, write a sentence. What caused the rise of the labor unions? Write it right underneath this slide, in the space underneath the slide. Write what caused the rise of labor unions. So the rise of unions. At this point, we're going to talk about 3 unions. Now, in the decision-making activity we did earlier, we talked about the National Labor Union. We are not going to talk about it in this lecture, although it's important. If I was you, I would pause the video right now. Go ahead, pause it. Go back to your notes and write a little bit on your notes about what the National Labor Union was, what they stood for, what actions and strategies they used, and who they were including. But at the end of the day, it's up to you. If you want to do it, it will be on the test. Here, however, we're also going to talk about the industrial workers of the world. And with the industrial workers of the world, we're going to focus on what they focused on, which was incorporating unskilled workers and having a more radical organization and more radical objectives. So real quick, the Knights of Labor, formed in Philadelphia, 1869, hoped to unite all working men and women. But they also focused on a lot more than that. They focused on skilled and unskilled workers. Again, this is from the decision-making activity we did earlier. They focused on skilled, unskilled workers, except for bartenders and lawyers. African Americans as well as whites were obviously promoted to join, the more people they could get in there. And they also wanted all ethnic groups except for Chinese. Now, again, it's hard for us in the 21st century to think about how they would have thought back then in the 19th century. But it's important to remember that they did have racial biases. We're going to talk about in a little bit, maybe a month or two, hopefully less than that, about eugenics and how racial ideologies played into this. But they did want all ethnic groups except for Chinese, and they also wanted women as well as men. Now, some of the issues, they wanted to set up cooperatives, reserve Western land for settlers, not speculators, abolish child labor, equal pay for equal work, a graduated income tax where the rich pays a higher percentage than the poor, establish an 8-hour workday, which interestingly is something we kind of have today, depending on where you work or what you do. Now, some of the strategies they used, they never officially involved electoral politics, but many of the labor parties did form under them. So today, a lot of the labor unions are associated with the Democrats. So that's kind of an interesting pull over to today. The American Federation of Labor allowed in only skilled workers, almost exclusively white men. Samuel Gompers is the name that you want to know for this part. Favored African Americans and women, but he lost that fight, so they were kept out. They wanted higher wages, better working conditions, a shorter workday, 8 hours, in order to reduce unemployment. Again, we have an 8-hour workday today. They opposed new immigration. Immigration we're going to get to in the next little chapter there. Hopefully skim right through it, but we'll see what happens. Strategies of the AFL, or the American Federation of Labor. They focus mainly on using strikes, increasing dues to save money for strikes. So if you remember, we did the decision-making activity from the perspective of business owners and employers. And as you may have guessed, they probably didn't react the best. So employers tried to stop unions by forbidding union meetings. So you weren't allowed to have a union meeting in the building or around the building. They would also fire and blacklist union organizers. So if one of you decided that you were going to form a student union, I could say, hey, you who organized it, to the leader, you're fired. And guess what? You're not going to be able to work at another company ever. And they'd put you on a blacklist. They would also force new employees to sign a yellow dog contract, which would say, hey, I'm going to work for you and you're going to pay me and protect me, but I won't join a union if I work for you. They also refused to bargain collectively, refused to recognize unions as their legitimate representatives. And they also used lockouts and strike breakers. So there's one story where everybody's on strike outside and the people are let in the back door, taking their jobs right out from under them. You want to go on strike? I'll just hire different people. Screw you guys. All right, now these next 3 slides in your notes, I don't have them up on mine, but you're focusing on answering the question, during the Gilded Age, did America change for the better or the worse? So think back 3 main ideas from the lectures. So go back and look through your notes, pick out 3 main ideas that either support the idea of a better I would just think about that as I was writing this essay, maybe incorporate that into your hook. So you have these 3 main ideas, and you're going to pick one specific detail, also known as a specific historical example, to support each of those main ideas. So at the end, if you have 3 main ideas and one historical example supporting each of those main ideas, you'll have 3. So main idea 1, historical example 1. Main idea number 2, historical example number 2. Main idea number 3, historical example number 3. So then at the last slide, on the last page, the very bottom, you're going to write a paragraph, pretending that you're writing a paper, a 5-paragraph essay on during the Gilded Age, did America change for the better or for the worse? So you're going to have a hook. That's one point. You're going to have 3 main ideas. You're going to have 3 supporting details. Each of those are a point, so 6 points right there. And an underlined thesis, 1 point for underlining it, including your 3, count them, 1, 2, 3 main ideas in your thesis, and a point for each of those main ideas in your thesis. So these notes are going to cost you a bit, but I hope this wasn't too much torture for you. It may have been, but it is what it is. Nevertheless, in the words of John and Hank Green, DFTBA.